All right, welcome back to our next episode of SCROTUS. This one is a nice tie-in with the previous episode. They
Does it? Sorry, if I'm part of SCROTUS temporarily here, am I honorary scrotoid?
You can call yourself
Can I
whatever
be
you
can I
wish.
be the scrotoid? Okay.
You can absolutely. Um, as I said in the last episode, this is sort of a companion case. They are different. They're actually very different, but they're both dealing with the same question of, can a government official block someone on a social media account? And is that a violation of the citizen's First Amendment? So that's the same kind of question that's going to come up here, but the facts and the background are quite different. So, and the arguments are quite different, which is interesting to me. This case is called Linkey versus Freed. Linkey or Lindkey, not again, pronunciation not so sure.
Something.
So in 2014, James Freed became the city manager of Port Huron, Michigan. And it's important to establish that this position is made by appointment, not election. So he was not actually elected to this position. He was hired/appointed to it. As part of the job of city manager, he is required to issue press releases about city functions, policies, what have you, goings on of the city. He announced information and posted these press releases to his Facebook page, which he had established well before he became this
Is he a
government
boomer?
official. I believe so.
Yeah. Continue.
So Mr. Freed established this Facebook page many, many years before he got his position. And he used the same Facebook page to now post government and
He's a
official
boomer. That's a
stuff.
boomer move. That's very okay. Confirmed.
His Facebook page, it should also be noted, announced him as a public figure, used a
Even more
professional
boomer.
headshot. He had links to the Port Huron City website, and his email address on the Facebook page was
LinkedIn profile.
was his official city manager email address. So everything at the top of the page looked like it would be an official government page. But again, he had the page way before when he actually became a government official. So Mr. Freed posted a lot of mixed content to this page. So he had personal pictures, Bible quotes, home improvement updates of his house, but he also included government press releases and things that the people of Port Huron needed to know.
I kind of love how boomer this is. He's a turbo boomer.
He's using one page to do
He
everything.
can just do it all.
When the pandemic started in 2020, the amount of press releases and health information that he needed to post obviously increased. And so his page looked very much like an official, government page because of the amount of stuff he had to post. And he would also throw in his personal opinion about the pandemic on the page as well.
And what is that opinion?
I'm not entirely sure, but I think you'll probably guess as we go on.
All right.
So, Mr. Lindkey, the other side of this case, he disagreed with the city's management of the pandemic and used several of his own accounts. So Mr. Lindkey had many accounts, and he used those accounts to post on Mr. Freed's account various comments and criticisms of how the city was running
We are just
during
adjudicating
COVID.
boomers online right now. That's all this is, it seems like. Which I'm all for. Adjudicate the shit out of them, but man.
Mr. Lindkey also posted, apparently, a picture of Mr. Freed enjoying a meal with the Port Huron mayor, saying that, look, they're indulging while the city's residents are facing hardships. Mr. Freed deleted all of Mr. Lindkey's comments and posts, and he blocked all of his many Facebook accounts from ever posting again. Therefore, Linkey sued, claiming that Freed was violating his First Amendment rights. Where have we heard that, right? The Eastern District Court of Michigan ruled in favor of Mr. Freed. So they ruled that Freed was not violating Linkey's First Amendment right. Linkey appealed, and the Sixth Circuit Court of Appeals agreed with the lower court and said that Mr. Freed was not violating Linkey's First Amendment rights. And so now, with another appeal, we've now come to the Supreme Court. So the interesting thing here is the arguments on both sides. So, in his argument, Mr. Linkey is using a very specific statute about officials acting, quote, under the color of law. The statute he's referring to reads in part as such, and let me quote it here. Every person who, under color of any statute, ordinance, regulation, custom, or usage of any state or territory or District of Columbia, subjects or causes to be subjected any citizen of the United States or other person within the jurisdiction thereof to the deprivation of any rights, privileges, or immunities secured by the Constitution and laws shall be liable to the party injured in an action at law. Basically, the statute is saying a citizen has the right to sue a government official who has violated their constitutional right. So it's basically just a statute saying, yeah, you have the right to sue them if they violate your right.
Okay.
Specifically when this government official is acting in their governmental capacity. That's the caveat there, right? So since his Facebook page had all of the markings of an official governmental Facebook page, and he often talked about city goings-on and things happening within the city, especially pandemic-related, and he interacted with his constituents, Mr. Linkey is saying, well, in using this Facebook page, he is acting, quote, under the color of the law. Linkey's argument also adds this fact, and this is interesting to me because it's linguistic related. This particular phrase, under the color of law, comes from an Anglo-American usage in law, and it originally referred to the king's officers in England who wore the king's coat of arms. So when they were wearing the king's coat of arms, any actions that they did then appeared official, right? They were under the color of the law.
Yep.
Even if they were not legally sanctioned, right?
So at some point, it doesn't matter.
Right. So anytime someone wearing this coat would do something, they were doing it under the color of the law, or as it was acted, they acted as if it were official. And there's also again a linguistic distinction that Linkey points to, and I want to make sure I get this worded correctly. So there's a distinction of by color of, which means it's not necessarily official, and by virtue of, meaning it is official, right? So if something says by virtue of, that means you must prove that this was an official government action. If a statute says by color of, then you can prove that, well, this person was acting as if he were in a governmental position, even if the government didn't tell him to do this thing. You see the distinction there?
Yeah, no, that fits.
So that's Mr. Linkey's argument. The reverse, Mr. Freed, he rejects this linguistic analysis, and he actually, unfortunately, in my opinion, because I like the linguistic analysis, he cites precedent from a 1988 case, Supreme Court case, West versus Atkins, which takes that statute and defines that phrase a little bit more concretely. So the opinion from that West versus Atkins case reads, quote, a public employee acts under color of state law while acting in his official capacity or while exercising his responsibilities pursuant to state law. Thus, since posting on his Facebook page is not a required responsibility, and not part of state law, and he was not asked by a superior in the government to do so, then he is not actually acting in state capacity. And so therefore his page is not, a state run page. It's his personal page, and he's allowed to block someone because he's not acting as a government official. So this one's a little bit more murky than our last episode, but because that precedent that I just referred to, the West versus Atkins, was set before social media existed, the original historical use, in my opinion, like that idea of the color of the law, seems to be more appropriate here, right? So in
As
19
as
yeah.
a cyberpunk medievalist, I would agree with you.
Well, the point
No,
being,
that is what I am. I'm a cyberpunk medievalist. No, because right, you got to exist in and outside of your time. Be very meta modern. Like the paradigm has shifted, right? Social media, the genie is already out of the bottle. Somebody
right,
rubbed it the right way. It came out, and it's not going back in. And so I agree with you. I think actually the older pre-modern definition of color of the law actually works better.
right, because this is completely novel case, because
Yep.
in 1988, when they made that opinion, they were literally having to talk about, well, this again, you're in a public forum, you're executing a statute, you're doing whatever you're doing, again, under someone's direct supervision, under the government's mandate, right? So therefore, any action that you do as a government official is under someone's purview. We're now in a point where social media removes that purview, and
Yeah.
you're now acting as a government official without someone looking over you.
If I may,
Mm-hmm.
this is the perfect intro to what I was trying my big reaction. Since I'm the reply guy here, right? I'm going to reply.
Wait,
Um,
hold
oh,
that
sorry,
thought,
but
because there's one thing that might
okay,
lead even better into what you're about to say.
do it.
Because I have a big problem with the fact that this case and the previous one from last episode didn't talk about, again, previous cases that have come up in just the past few years dealing with social media company, excuse me, ability to silence people, right? So we've had cases where social media companies were brought on the carpet saying, will you silence this point of view? Thus, you're violating my First Amendment right.
Well, yeah, there's a huge thematic crossover to these cases as well. This is very
Right.
important for anybody in the dissident space online, which I think includes probably a lot of people listening to this. So,
But
yeah,
Justice Thomas said something about this back in 2021 that I think is appropriate in these cases that I wanted to bring up. Although it hasn't been brought up in these specific cases, and I'm
share it.
wondering why.
Thomas is cool, so share it.
So back in 2021, there was a case involving Trump and how he blocked people on social media, and it was very similar to what we're talking about here. The case was eventually dismissed as moot because Trump was no longer president, and there was no point in talking about it. The court wanted to basically put off the eventuality of hearing a case like this until, I guess, now. So Justice Thomas said at that time, quote, it seems rather odd to say that something is a government forum when a private company has unrestricted authority to do away with it. That is a huge point that no one has made yet, right? We have a private company who can do whatever they want because they're a private company. Yet we're focusing on what the users of that private company are doing.
Yeah. Well,
Sorry,
and the
go ahead.
no go well. This is good. The corpo user distinction is something that exists within cyberpunk worlds, right? And this is our modern life, or postmodern life. No, no. The bigger point is that like we are attempting to apply modernist legal models to something that is no longer modern, right? We've moved into something else, and nothing fits, nothing works. the public-private distinction doesn't make a whole lot of sense in this instance, or in these kinds of instances, because online it's really hard to tell. You have like the Seattle or the Washington State Department of Transportation Twitter page. Okay, so it's like those of us who have to drive in the Northwest, follow it. They'll tell you when roads are closed. But it's interesting because like this is a government page on a private service,
Mm-hmm.
and they'll post like WADOT will post. This is a Northwest thing, but WADOT will post like holiday gifts. Like it's Happy Halloween from Washington State Department of Transportation. It's like the Munsters, and you're like, that's great that you have a social media team to do this, but what the fuck is happening? Because you're about traffic closures, and now it's just weird. That's not malicious. I don't really care, but it makes you think like that's a government page, or although it's clearly just a staffer or somebody working posting this. So what is real? What is public? What is private? As somebody who overthinks things, this is what I always think about. And
Right.
more egregious examples of this would be maybe more like the the Joe Biden Twitter page, which is clearly not Joe. And you're like, so what is public, what is private? And B, the bigger question is, who is real online? And this is an issue that, like, I think in some ways, if I may, the anons, this will piss off all the Jordan Peterson fans, but they should be pissed off. Super cringe. The whole, you shouldn't post anonymously online. You should stand. No, that is he's a boomer. Only boomers think like this. You have to go full William Gibson, who is also a boomer, but is a based boomer, right? Author of Neuromancer, and just go embrace the anonymity, embrace the fact that you're sort of not yourself online. And maybe the law is just going to have a hell of a time figuring this out. I think in the future, I'm trying to extrapolate, because how are you supposed to public-private distinctions? Man, what does that even mean?
Right.
If everyone's constantly online, which we all are, constantly going between public and private stuff, particularly with working like decentralized work, where you're like, I work from home and sometimes I'm on and sometimes I'm not. Well, if you're smarter and you're a little bit younger generationally, you'll have different accounts for that. But again, that's why I said early on in this episode, boomer. Yeah, boomer. It's all just ever one thing on the boomer accounts, but it doesn't work. So the bigger issue for me, all of that autistic philosophical stuff aside, is I feel like there almost needs to be a rule that public officials have to, like, there needs to be an enforceable kind of, if they're gonna keep the public-private distinction as part of the legal framework, then you're gonna really have to crack down on people having separate accounts. But I don't know if the managerial class can handle it. A lot of the older managerial people are boomers. They don't have that concept of separate accounts. Because they're like, well, it's just me. Sometimes at work, I'm like, but you're always online. Your account is always up.
Right.
Anyhow.
As I said before, the tests that are going to come out of this are going to be interesting, and I'm wondering I'm really curious as to how they're going to try and define some of these distinctions. But to use, because the Supreme Court in the oral argument of these particular cases, this and the previous episode, they were trying, again, as I mentioned previously, they were trying to make this analogy of, well, what if we were in the real world? Like, not the social media is not the real world, but you know what I mean? Like, what if we were in person?
Dave Chappelle reminds us that Twitter is not real life.
It's not, but
it also kind of is. It affects real life. This is my point, this is why I love cyberpunk as a genre. You're like, what is real and what is physical? What is metaphysical, man? It's all yes. It's a cybernetic way of existing. But this points out that our frameworks are incapable of handling it. Because the public forum used to be a place that you had to walk to or ride a horse to, and then later maybe drive to. Now it's just everywhere.
Right.
On the toilet in the morning is the public square. Well, my best tweets come when I'm dropping a number 2, so I guess it is. But you see what I'm saying. Sorry for the overshare, but everyone does it. You know what I mean, though? It's like that's what I'm saying is like you welcome the public sphere into your house on a little device. And okay, great, you can turn it off, but you can turn it on when you want to, or you get a ping, somebody tweeted at you. Are you back in the public sphere now? Are you in the private sphere? You know, hear what I'm saying? Like there's no
Yes.
this like it's all together.
But that Thomas quote, if we really wanted to make that analogy and extrapolate it to like a, actual physical space, that would be akin to someone holding like a town hall, right? So let's
Right.
say I'm running for something, or no, let's say I have some government position and I want to have an open town hall where people can come ask me questions. But I rent out a room from a local business,
Or
and
the Eagles Club.
that person who owns the business is standing in the back of the room the whole time, and they can stand up and say, "Oh, I don't like what the question that person asked, throw them out." But I'm not allowed to say that, right? So I, as the government official, can't silence people, but this person who owns the space can't. I don't know. I don't like it.
Well, I don't think you're supposed to like it, but I think this is an inherent problem. I mean, this isn't this connected to the commons, like the broader issue of like what constitutes a place, what constitutes a neutral, what constitutes a public as AKA in the sense of non-private space. It was hard enough before, really hard now.
Right. Right. And
And if not impossible, I really wonder philosophically, like on a political philosophical level, how are you supposed to I I've given up because it's too confusing.
but specifically I mean, on a legal level, just, specifically talking about
Yeah.
this particular podcast, it-
But like, well,
it's very
on a legal
hard.
level, all the more so.
It's very hard to make that distinction between I can say that Twitter, Facebook are private companies and they're allowed to act as they want and do, censor what they want. And with that being said, the court also, in the same breath, said it's actually not it's not akin to it's not akin to a public forum, right? In making those decisions, they basically said outright, Twitter and Facebook are not public forums because they're owned by private companies. But then in these cases, now that we've just talked about, it's now become a public forum. And now we're talking about it as if it were a public forum. You can't have it both ways.
But that discrepancy is indicative of what I'm saying is that
I
there's a
know.
real philosophical problem that is working itself out in the legal sphere, and it's a matter of who wants it more. I think you fight like round one fight, like because you can make arguments both ways.
Yes. And I personally could make arguments both ways
Uh-huh. Yeah.
because I am a fan of saying, yes, a private company has the right to censor what they want. I can say that. But
Mm.
knowing that Twitter and Facebook are being used again as public forums, are they actually allowed to do that? I don't
And
know.
our private companies being used against people in this country. Is that not happening right now?
Yeah.
Are there not products being forced upon people in this country right now? Private products that are being forced by public entities upon people.
Very, very colorful way of veiling that. But yes, I think
So
most
you
of
hear
us
what I'm saying?
get
This
what
is the
you're
big
saying.
problem. Is saying, well, the private companies are always fine because capitalism or something like that is not a. It's not a very useful. It's just you can use it as a tool, but I don't think that's like an underlying philosophy, right? For me, it comes down to what framework are we operating in, right? Who is dictating the sort of there's a culture, right? It comes down to a cultural question. The culture of Facebook is not the culture of Twitter, and vice versa. And Elon gets a ton of hate, and I'm not a diehard Elon stan, but I will tell you right now, the culture of Twitter, which is dictated to a certain extent from on high, and then that's in conversation with what users do, um, is a lot more my kind of thing than Facebook. And in some ways, and not to go, it always comes back to Yarvin with me, but there is something of this like, who is your monarch? right? Who is the one, who is the accountable leader? And that will determine a lot of this. I know that doesn't work on a legal level. It doesn't matter. Okay, fine. It's not exactly what we're talking about, but this notion of public private is depends on whose definition of public and whose definition of private, right? So even the platforms are going to have differentiation between this. And the fact that this is on Facebook is also interesting to me because of user base, boomers, very, very Facebook. They took it from us millennials. Remember what they took from you. Um, and B, like, I'm trying to imagine this happening in this way on Twitter. And obviously Trump had his, cases on pertaining to Twitter, maybe, but I feel like this feels like a very much of a Facebook case. Like only on Facebook would have gotten this way. Not that people aren't nasty on Twitter, but you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like the dynamic in which the feud, which is really what all suits are, played out is very Facebook. That's interesting.
Yeah.
It's just interesting. I'm trying to imagine what this would have looked like on Twitter. It would have looked different. I don't know if you have thoughts on that, but
No, because well, I kind of want. I guess I want to tie this up in
sorry. But
saying no,
anyhow,
no. It sort of answers your question. It's in a way. The previous case from the last episode, I think was the two lower courts sided against the government officials, and I think they mainly did just for the fact that their pages that they were speaking from were clearly just governmental use. So I think that one's a little bit more cut and dry. This case that we're talking about in this episode, the Linkey Fried case, I think the reason that the two lower courts sided with Fried is mainly due to the fact that his page was a lot of personal stuff as well. In fact,
well,
it
his
probably
personal
was.
stuff. Sorry, his
It
personal
probably.
stuff.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Probably, I would not be surprised if his opinion about pandemic-related response influenced the way that the suit's going. At least
Maybe.
I'd be curious about that.
Maybe. But because his personal stuff probably outweighed the amount of governmental stuff he posted, they probably had to, go off of, well, okay, this is more of a personal page. He has the right to block someone. But I think it's a lot. Again, we have to have a tighter test, if you will, to use Supreme Court jargon. We have to have a tighter test to determine, what to do in cases like this. So I'm really, really, really interested to see what comes of both this case and the previous case we talked about, but specifically this one because I'm sort of more invested in Mr. Linkey's linguistic argument of under the color of law because I frankly find it a convincing argument.
Yeah, no, be careful how you're portraying yourself online, right? Like, and in what guise, under what banner, under what colors are you portraying yourself? I do contend that boomers are incapable of making this distinction, by and large.
Perhaps.
I think they just can't. So I'm trying to say it's not even his fault.
I know plenty of boomers, so yes, perhaps you are correct.
That's a defense they should use.
Yeah.
Your Honor, my client is a boomer and therefore is incapable of. Sorry.
Before we alienate any boomers, not that
No, we love boomers,
here.
but it's a distinct because they didn't grow up with the technology, right?
Yeah.
No, it's literally like it's like millennials can't drive stick by and large. Some of us can. I'll raise my hand, but it's if it's a technology you don't grow up with, you're not used to making that distinction, right?
Right.
And you'll do stupid things like pull up too close to somebody on a hill, start and then or get to and wonder why you get why somebody rolled into you. It's like, well, they're in a manual. It's a similar kind of dynamic.
Well, I imagine these two cases probably will not be decided until like February or March. So we have a little bit of time before we get opinions, but I'm looking forward to them. So until then, case dismissed.